امروز روز 2 فوریه 1985 مصاحبه میکنیم با آقای دکتر مهدی ضرغامی در آرلینگتون مساچوست و مصاحبه کننده شهلا هایری. آقای دکتر ضرغامی، همونطور که شما گفتین ما این مصاحبه رو به انگلیسی و فارسی و هر طور که Alright, I'll start with English and we can switch back and forth as we feel comfortable. Now we'd like to get some information about your background first. We'd like to start with your father and his family background. Please describe in as much detail as you would like.
Okay, I come primarily from a family of military men. My grandfather was in Reza Shah's army. He became the commander of army at time of Reza Shah. My father went to military academy also, and he became also the commander of ground forces in late 1960s. My family is also very religious at the same time. In fact, my grandfather retained his beard all through his commandership, and my father has a beard now, but he didn't have the beard at time of Shah. But it's a sort of a combination of religion and military that sort of perpetuated through the part of the family or background that I was associated with. Before that, I think we were more in military also. My great-grandfather, etc. All the pictures of these people are with medals and military uniform. That I think pretty much sums up my family background. We were not rich, but we were not poor also. I mean, we had although both my father and my grandfather, they had the highest office in military, and supposedly in regimes that the power was derived from military, but we never had a sort of affluent mode of life. Both my grandfather and my father were living with a salary, and that's it.
Your father was the only son who also fathered his daughters?
No, my uncle, I have an uncle who became a colonel, but he never went up much beyond the colonel in the army. He wasn't studious. There is my grandfather and my father, and I think I've gained a lot of some of my characters genetically are very precise and very hardworking.
Coming from a military background?
Yeah. Relatively law obedient, but at the same time they, especially my grandfather, had a lot of intellectual ability, which was very unique because of the fact that he was in military and religion, and but he was an intellectual in his own creed.
When you say religious, could you define that a little bit more? I mean, was he doing his
he wrote a book. The book is called which he published only 80 copies and handed to only his trusted and worthy friends, which did not include, although he was friendly to lots of these ayatollahs, did not include the ayatollahs, because he thought that many of the ayatollahs really didn't know what they were talking about. when it came to problems associated with philosophy of Islam, he had done a lot of research, and he had written this book, which was half Arabic, half Farsi, very sort of classic in style, and it was very hard to read because it was intermingled, Farsi and Arabic. It was called Velayat and something. I don't recall right now the second word, but it was something that essentially went in depth into the relationship of a Muslim, a Shia Muslim, and Wali. And this was written. He died in 1979, before revolution, just a couple of months before revolution. In fact, when they wanted to bury him in Qom, inside Hazrat Masumeh shrine, the revolutionaries thought that this was the body of General Owaisi, who had undergone a heart attack, and that was essentially a lot of I remember my father went to Shariat Madari, and anyway, they didn't let him be buried inside the shrine at that time because he was escorted by military guards and this sort of thing. His body was escorted.
So what happened? What did he?
Well, they took him outside of shrine and they buried him in another locale.
So at that point he talked about the question of the concept of vilayat,
Yes.
which was later on picked up by...
Well, it was in Shia Islam for a long time, but anyway, he addressed that issue, and he addressed it quite well, because I used to sit with him and discuss, although he never considered me really high up on the understandings or standards of basic philosophic principles of Shia, but he tried to explain certain things to me. But I remember seeing Ayatollah Musavi Ardebili there, and he was talking to him, and he didn't have a high regard of him as somebody who understands principles of Islam.
What was he known as?
He was known as General ضرغامی.
General ضرغامی?
Sallashkar ضرغامی.
Very interesting. Because I thought he might have some religious type.
No.
Would you please describe about your mother and her family background?
Well, my mother again comes from a sort of an average family, but her father was in military, but that it's not a military family. It was just her father was in military, but her parents got divorced when she was kid anyway, and then she married my father when she was 19 or 17 to 19, I don't recall which one. And anyway, she's hardworking, and she suffered a lot. She doesn't have a very high education. I think they went to 7th, 8th, 9th grade or something like that. And
When you say she suffered, is this...
well, the family relationships, especially my grandfather's house, there were so many people. I mean, it was my grandfather family, our family, my uncle's family, all of us were living under one big umbrella. I mean, that sort of several houses interconnected together and this sort of thing. And I know that we had a lot of financial problems, but anyway, that was emotionally, psychologically, and financially, there was hard to live in Iran of that time.
So was she being dominated by the in-laws and the rest of the extended family?
Oh yeah, I think that sort of problem usually existed. But anyway, she was more of the dominating kind rather than being dominated. But anyway, nevertheless, whether you are dominating or dominant, whether you are dominating or being dominated, you're going to suffer in extended family structure.
How many siblings do you have? How many siblings, children? I mean, how many sisters and brothers?
Oh, I have 2 sisters only.
So you're the only son?
I'm the only son.
Are you the oldest?
Yeah, I'm the oldest.
Where were you born?
I was born in Isfahan, exactly during the Second World War, because my parents went to Isfahan for a short time when the capital was transferred for a few days from Tehran to Isfahan. And I was born there upon arrival, and they got back to Tehran a few days later.
What is the date of your birth?
September 1, 1941.
Excuse me. Now, I would like to ask you to describe in as much detail as you'd like about your childhood and your upbringing, that is the Tarbiyat, you know, where you went to school and
Yeah,
high school.
I went to the local, we used to live in Serai Jaleh, and I went to the local school there, the local public school there, and then until 9th grade I was attending, end of the 9th grade, I was attending the local schools in the neighborhood, whether it was primary school or the secondary school. My 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I went to Alborz High School. My father wasn't very restrict, and my mother was not very restrict. In fact, there was, I mean, my father, if he was in the military, you would never be able to identify him as a military person. That's because he never acted as a domineering man. We had relatively, it was sort of relaxed atmosphere, and there was no special force being exerted to bring me up in a special way or anything. I mean, in fact, nobody noticed that children existed.
That's right.
Then I was very studious, and I was usually trying to be the best student in the class. I sometimes succeeded, not always, and I had good competition.
Were you Shagir Awal?
Well, many times I became Shagir Awal. Then I went to Alborz. Then I became Shagir Awal Tehran in Riyazi, and then there was another competition. I became Shagir Dovam Iran in Riyazi in math. And then I was at Alborz. I really got interested in Riyazi and math, and if I wasn't from a developing country, or if I had some financial stature family-wise, I would have probably gone into pure mathematics and studied pure mathematics at college, but somehow coming up from I saw my father and the financial problems that he had and this sort of things, and I never wanted to become a military person. I love mathematics so much. I mean, that was out of question. So I went into engineering, and I came to America. I studied at Georgia Tech, and I got my bachelor in civil engineering there in 1962. Then I went to University of Illinois, and I got my master's and PhD in, again, structural engineering I got my PhD in 1965. Then I came to this company in 1965, and I started working for them. At the same time, since I was always interested in mathematics, I went to MIT and I got a master in mathematics, in pure mathematics, from MIT in 1968. During these 3 years, I was working full-time here also. So in 1968, I went back to Iran and started teaching at Aryamir University of Technology.
You must have been very young.
Yeah, I was, when I finished high school, it was 1959. When I finished BS, my Bachelor of Civil Engineering, it was 1962. That took me 3 years. And 3 years later, I got my PhD. And when I was working, I was used to working full-time and studying full-time when I went to study mathematics, I didn't have much mathematics background. I never went to undergraduate mathematics, and going to graduate mathematics and getting MS in 1 year, essentially, while working required a lot of work. But I wasn't afraid of working. And during that time, I also published 6-7 articles. I was very... Well, the articles I published in 1965 to 1968, I was working on antennas and on antennas. I published it actually not in... I published some articles in structural engineering, primarily on shell theory and vibration. But then I went into electrical engineering, and I published a couple of articles in electrical engineering on antenna performance. Then I did some other work that was published in American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. When I finished my MS and I went to Iran, I started, in Iran I was teaching few courses. I really enjoyed teaching. And then I started doing research in mathematics, and I published a series of articles in mathematics. And a year after I was promoted after I got to Iran, I was promoted to associate professorship. And then 4 years later, I became a full professor. I was one of the first full professors of Aryamir University of Technology.
You started teaching there from the beginning?
Yeah, I started teaching. Here I was doing primarily design work and research and development work. But in Aryamir University, I started teaching. I taught mathematics, operations research, and numerical methods and this sort of thing. But my research was primarily in areas that I tried to establish a mathematical foundation for some of the engineering concepts, and it was very interesting, and it was a work that I could do easily in Iran, because mathematics you don't need. I knew engineering fairly well, and I knew mathematics, and I could marry the two fields and work in Iran, because in technical areas, you had to be in contact, continuous contact with the field. In sort of theoretical areas, maybe you can work in Iran. Anyway, I did a lot of work in first few years in Iran, and I published a number of papers. One of the papers won an award, and anyway, until I became involved with what I call as the construction of or design and construction of the Aryamer University of Technology in Isfahan. That was in 1971, I think. That was 3 years afterwards. I started there was a mandate at the beginning that Aryamer University should be built in Isfahan. Nobody took it very seriously. First of all, Mujtahidi, who built the Aryamer University of Technology, thought that the university can't be built in anywhere other than Tehran, because it's not going to be able to absorb good faculty, and if you don't have good faculty, you don't have good students. And he was right. You couldn't have built a good university outside of Tehran. If anybody returned at that time to Iran, was primarily because he wanted to be close to his family. And most of the people came from Tehran who had opportunity to come at that time, to come to America, get a PhD or this sort of thing. But somehow, Mr. Amuzigar from the beginning was pushing for decentralization, and he said that one day I remember Reza Amin was the chancellor of the university, and he called me and he said that would I like to be involved with the design of the essentially design and building of this whole university. And I said yes, if it would be an independent university. I don't have to take these people and take. He says yes. Well, he didn't say yes. He said he has to go to His Majesty. And anyway, he came back and he said, yeah, it's independent. And so I started to design that university from scratch, from the philosophy. No. Starting with the philosophy of education, going all the way to the physical, and then going and training the faculty and this sort of things. And I did that, and it took me from 1971 until 1977 that the doors was opened and the first students went in. But somehow, around 1976-77, I found out that it wasn't that clear that this university would be totally independent from the Aryamer University in Tehran, and there was a big issue even up through the revolution time, that whether Aryamer University should go or shouldn't go to Isfahan. But it was designed and built as an independent university, and that was, I think, I love that project, and I think I put everything I had into that, and I built that university until in 1977 it was open. And started student enrollment. I can talk about that in greater detail if you want to.
We would like to. But let me just ask for one clarification. When you say Aryamer Isfahan being independent, did you mean to have two Aryamer, or do you mean to have the Aryamer in Tehran transplanted?
No. I wanted independent in the sense that you would not transplant a university from Tehran to Isfahan.
So would have one Aryamer in
You would
Tehran.
have double campus system, like, but they are independent in the sense that, I mean, the California system, for example, you have different campuses. You don't have to build for example, a campus at this location and then transplant whole that university there, because Mr. Amuzegar was very much interested in decentralization. He permitted small colleges and this sort of thing that would have attracted thousands of students to be built in Tehran, but and many other things. And Tehran was growing like mad, but somehow he was under the impression that the university must be transplanted, or must be moved from Tehran to Isfahan. I was of the opinion that it would be a completely independent university, it would be a second, University of Aryamer in Tehran and University of Aryamer in Isfahan would be under one umbrella, but would have different campuses. There are many universities, even in Massachusetts, that have multiple campuses, like University of Massachusetts, which has Amherst, Worcester, and Boston campuses.
Why? I mean, you said that first they said it's okay, you could have it independent, and then later on, somehow, they seem to have changed their mind.
When somebody goes to His Majesty and gets permission, he describes the situation and he agrees. What he has to do immediately after that is to write a letter and or he had to write a letter to the office of His Majesty and get approval written that this has happened. It is not well known whether to others what happened. And if Shah doesn't, and nobody can ask Shah, do you remember you said such and thing? I mean, I don't know really whether at the time when Reza Amin told me that he had his understanding of what I was asking was exactly what he was conveying the answer to me. It's possible that he may have misunderstood. He may not have conveyed the same thing I had in mind by independence. And because later on they told me that when I was Chancellor of Aryamer University here, they told me that, oh, yeah, Aryamer University in Tehran can continue to exist, but not, it can continue to exist as another form of a university that would train another type of graduates. They wanted more practical people to be trained in Tehran and more sophisticated engineers in Isfahan.
So what is the problem there? I mean,
well, the point is this, that you cannot decide on a day that you are going to change the attitude of a university, and you are going to, from today, you are going to make practical. I mean, what happens to these guys who are professors? Are they supposed to all move to Isfahan? Well, anyway, somehow the point of moving of the Aryamer University from Tehran to Isfahan became a political issue. And in the year before revolution, it was probably a source of dissent amongst the faculty at Aryamer University, and it resulted in strikes of faculty, continuous strikes, and then it led to the government of Mr. Amuzegar discontinued the salaries of the professors, and then the students were on strike. The whole somebody, if you ask some of the professors of Aryamer University, they said that this issue contributed more than anything else to the revolution. But anyway, that's it.
No, this is in fact very interesting, because one of the issues involved here is for us to know how university systems work in their totality.
Yeah. Well, Aryamer University was somewhat different. Aryamer University was a university that was named after Shah, and the head of Pahlavi University and head of Aryamer University and head of Tehran University had direct access to Shah. Well, head of Tehran University was I mean, occupied by a highly influential man usually, and he always had access to Shah, regardless of whether there was something called Minister of Higher Education or not. I mean, by his personality, the guy would have access to Shah. The head of Aryamer University and Pahlavi University. The head of Aryamer and Pahlavi universities had access to Shah because Shah really loved these two universities, and he was involved with the development of these universities. He would make decisions that were requested by the chancellor. He would never want to see the head of Aryamer University, but if the head of Aryamer University wanted to see him, he would give him audience. At the time I was there, the reasons why I had to see Shah, for example, I was chancellor, or the reasons I know some of the previous chancellors had to see Shah, was these sort of problems that it was outside of your control. Somebody in the board of trustees, being influenced by the general policies of the government at the time, would say that, okay, you have to go to, I mean, you have to move the university to Isfahan. That's where you are. That's why you were given the right to give high salaries. Aryamer University could give much higher salaries to the faculty than Tehran University, not because of the fact that it was Aryamer University, because they said that this is a university that's supposed to be in Isfahan. It's temporarily here. So we give the higher salaries that are associated with out of Badiyah or Duri az Markaz, we permit them to give higher salaries like University of Pahlavi because they were away from the capital. Now, in the minds of the bureaucracy, they had all sorts of explanations why the university should move. The professors didn't know why they were getting high salary, and they couldn't live with lower salary in Tehran anyway. So the fact that they had to move or change or this sort of things was always a problem, and they were antagonists, especially near the end, that really utilized this dissent amongst the professors to sort of manipulate them in the way that they wanted.
So the original plan was to move some of these professors to Isfahan.
The original plan was that the Aryamer University is going to be built in Isfahan. And that was why they got the permission to give higher salaries. What Mujtahidi did, he said that if I build the university in Tehran, nobody can move it to Isfahan. So he didn't like the idea, although the idea was dictated by Mr. Amuzegar, at that time a celebrated minister in the board of trustees, and also then Mr. Ibn Hoveyda, prime minister, who was also a member of board of trustees. He apparently went and talked to His Majesty about it and backed it up. Even Shah was sold the idea that university should be built in Isfahan, and he was always pressing from the beginning. Mujtahidi managed not to do anything about it and say that we need the land and architect. I mean, he dragged his feet. Professor Reza was the second chancellor of Aryamer University. He really didn't get that much chance to get involved, although he initiated some activity about getting a piece of land. Finally, at the time of Reza Amin, the land was obtained. The land was enormous. It was 17 million square meters of land, which was few kilometers. I mean, about from this side to the other side was 7-8 kilometers, and it was in a beautiful place. And then Dr. Amin hired Arthur D. Little to come up with a functional master plan. all of these studies were really done by chancellors who were not committed to move to Isfahan. That would have sort of delayed the issue long enough until well, they knew each one of them knew that it's only a matter of 2-3 years, and they had enough headache. They didn't want this big headache of going to the faculty say that you have to move there when there was nothing there to move to. So I came on board, and it was well known among faculty that university had to move someday. But it was also a fact that if they had organized themselves properly, maybe they didn't have to move. Anyway, when I got on board, the question I raised was this: that if I want to build a university from scratch, I have so much freedom to start with a new philosophy, new concept, and I didn't want to move everybody. You're confining yourself so much to the forms and to the ideas that were developed at here, and rather than the new ideas that you wanted to implement. So I said that, can this exist and that exist simultaneously? And the answer at that time was yes. Then when I became chancellor, a lot of things had happened in the interim, which one was that the student body of the Ariamel University had received a lot of political orientation. In fact, it was a highly active group of students amongst all the, maybe the highest, both the communists and the Islamic Marxists or Mujahideen, whatever. I don't want to use these names because what existed at that time is different from what transpired through time later on. Anyway, Mujahideen and Fadaiyun, or the Marxists and the Islamic Marxists or whatever, they were both highly active at Ariamel University. And then I think the regime also didn't want that to persist, and they were looking for all means of disintegrating that quotation nest of activity. By 1977, not only the students were highly politicized, what is the word, politicized, I mean, but also the faculty now was active, because the seeds of dissent had been implanted amongst faculty, and well, the government wasn't helping much either, especially at the time of Amuzegar, when there was no minister of higher education, or there was no body to make a decision. If you were at that time, I was gone from university. I was now at that time I was managing director of Iran, the National Iranian Copper Industries. But the man who succeeded me, he had hard time to getting proper cooperation from government.
If you may go back just a little bit, when you were proposing the idea, I mean, when you were working on your idea of starting a new university in Isfahan, did you, or did the university have public forums whereby you would present your ideas to the student body or to other faculty members?
No. The structure of the university, the structure of decision making of the university was something like this. There was His Majesty, you would never raise a problem to His Majesty unless it was a cumbersome problem that it could not be solved otherwise. There were too many factors. You had to make a decision. There were too many factors, too many opposing views, and contradiction of expressed policies with your intentions and this sort of things. Like this example that I said. Or there were things that Shah had instituted. For example, I had to go once, one of my audiences, I talked to Shah about Rastakhi's party. He expected that suddenly everybody, all the qanuns would flourish and mushroom, and the students would coalesce around these qanuns, and he would have a party of his own rather than leaving the entire student body to the two centers of attraction, which were Mujahideen and Fadaiyan. That didn't take place, and he asked me, what have you done concerning Rastakhi's party? I said, nothing. He said, what do you mean nothing? He said, well, because this is a matter of fighting. If we want to establish a party, we must have a political thought. We must have a philosophy. We can't say Shah said it and expect all the students to jump. I said, what do we need? He said, well, if you want to fight an idea, we have to develop an idea.
Did you actually tell him?
Yeah, and he said that, well, and then he took it from here on and said we must have a dialectic. Yes. And then he issued that order the next day or a couple of days afterwards to the government that you have to write the philosophy of the Rastakhi's party based on dialectic principles and this sort of things. But unless there were issues that would be headache for the Chancellor, he would never raise it to His Majesty. It was the headache issues that would go to him. Other than those issues, the rest of the operation of the university was done essentially by the Chancellor. He was in charge of the university, and he was working essentially with two bodies. One is called Hayat Omana, or Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees had to make all the had to give approval to all decisions that had financial implications. And then the second one was Shorai Danishgah, or University Council. University Council had to approve, or actually it had to approve. That was the body that was making decision. In fact, the Chancellor of University had no authority other than although I don't know whether he had veto power or not. I don't believe he had veto power. But he had to all the academic decisions were going essentially through the University Council. When I became in charge of the new university, which was Aryama University of Isfahan, I was working under the direction of the Chancellor, and my power was derived from his authority. So he couldn't have committed anything other than the outside of rules and regulations that were set forth by Hayat Omana. We were not at all confined by what I call regulations governing the operation of government-owned activities. I mean, although the money was coming primarily from government, although I have to explain that Aryamer University was a private, and at the beginning it was intended to operate as a private institution. In fact, Mujtahidi went around and collected the money and did not get much from government. Then later on, more and more there was reliance on government funds until lately most of the money was coming from government solely. And there was some contribution which was made by National Iranian Oil Company, which came to the general funds of the Aryamer University, but that was also remnants of what the activity that Mujtahidi started to make a private institution and not be so much under the paws of the government.
So what changed it?
Well, the fact that when you start a university, you don't need much money. As the university grows, it needs an operating budget of 100 million tuman a year. And you can't get 100 million tuman a year from private sources, but maybe 5-10 million tuman you could get. That's what he did. In the first 2 years, in the first year, I think he got 90% of his operating budget from people. He just went around and collected the money. In fact, he was told to start a university in 1965 or 66. He was told to start a university. The same year, he started the university. I mean, if he wanted to write a budget and give it to government and this and that, it would have taken through 2-3 years just to get the funds. But he immediately started the university. He actually borrowed a place. He got money and contribution from here and there. He asked contractors that he knew to come and build something, and he built what is known as sule. Sule is a sort of industrial frame that you put up, and then he spent very little money to build the university in a matter of few months and let the university start operation. And he did a beautiful job. In 6 months, the university started. Once the university starts, you can not stop it. It's well, Khomeini has proved otherwise, but usually you couldn't stop it at that.
Under logical.
So that's what happened. Anyway, we are jumping all over the place in time domain at least, but the subject is the same.
Well, yes, I mean, please feel free to just say whatever you like about
anyway,
it.
When I became in charge of Aryamer University in Isfahan, I tried to build a new university and make it independent in the sense that I would not be constrained by the regulations of the council from the academic point of view. I had the same financial regulations to observe because the chancellor of the university was bound by those the regulations on transactions and contracts and this sort of thing. But academically, I didn't want to go to the university council. The reason is this, that usually whenever you go to university council, you found, first of all, there were so many issues in front of a university council of an emerging university in a society that didn't have a tradition of an educational system at all compatible with what was going on at that time. Previous to Aryamer University, the S1 University, Shiraz, Tehran, etc., was primarily modeled after a French system. And right around 1966-67, when Aryamer University started functioning, what they call as educational revolution of Shah started. And the two universities, which were Pahlavi University and Aryamer University, were essentially manned by American trained people, and more or less it was much easier for them to understand and implement a system which was compatible to the Carnegie credit system in this country. It wasn't so easy at Tehran University, etc. But nevertheless, even at Aryamed University, there were a lot of French and German and British educated people who had different concepts. And Shorai Daneshgah, or University Council of the university, was a place to sit down and argue things out. Endless hours, days, from morning till night, we were discussing what should be the structure of the program, what should be the content, what should be the organizations, and this sort of things. How should the faculty be promoted? Aryamer University was the only university I know of that completely the promotion of faculty was in the hand of faculty and students. Nobody, neither from the higher echelons in ministry or even the chancellor, had much to say about the promotion of faculty. This division of powers and authorities was well done in Aryamer University, and it was. This is later on, of course, a problem developed. The problem stemmed from the fact that an informal organization started taking shape at Aryamer University, which was essentially a sort of union for faculty. And that, well, the country wasn't coped to deal with unions. And that was
actually
well, it started
official
like
union,
it wasn't. Well, I don't know what is official union. Official means that it's officially registered with Savak. I mean, it wasn't official, or maybe it was. I don't know what it was, but it was a struggle on the part of a certain number of faculty to gain authority, and what they had was essentially they started by as something called Comité Refah, which is to provide for refah of professors, essentially. Comité Refah first addressed issues of salaries not enough, and you have to get high promotions, and every year they did a sort of a symbolic strike or protest of some form, and they got 10%, 20%, 25% raise. The raise was natural because it was in the years that Iran, there was a tremendous inflation in Iran. Then after a little while, they became much more interested in other powers. And then
like political powers?
Well, I don't know what is political power. Is politics. I mean, it is by definition. It is. It's not. But by political, I don't mean that associated with established parties or lines of thought. But it was. It was essentially to get involved in. What they did was this: that they ran. They selected and ran their people for certain offices, which was academic, etc., etc. And so instead of getting good people selected, essentially, they were people who had special commitments, because Aryamer University was primarily governed by officials who were selected by the faculty, essentially. And this... First of all, the chairman of the departments, instead of being people of educational stature, I am talking about people of academic stature, they became people who are loyal to Comité Refah. And then you found out that whatever you had to deal with, like promotion, like various other things, you have people from Comité Refah who were infiltrating everywhere. Then there was a sort of an internal struggle between the chancellors of the university and the Comité Refah in order to gain power enough to run the university, and also a lot of excellent academicians, they became also anti-Comité Refah. That means you had essentially three poles. One was Comité Refah, and which were a large number of people who came from Germany and who couldn't publish and this sort of things, or they had harder some of the people from Germany did excellent work, but some of the others were not so easy in writing a paper. It wasn't easy for them to write a paper and publish it. So they coalesced around Comité Refah. The academicians, the good researchers, good teachers, etc., they didn't like Comité Refah. And essentially the governing people had another pole. Now, at times, academicians and governing people, they got together. But it had to do with how much, if the pressure from government on special issue was too much, like Rastakhis and these sort of things, then they would break up. But essentially there were three poles at that time.
It's interesting that you identified the Comité Refah with people who primarily come from other countries in the lecture.
It was the point is this, that Comité Refah was a source of power. It was an informal power struggle, and it was source of power, and there was a lot of dissent in the university because the promotion regulations that we ourselves wrote and we ourselves executed was too stringent for us to accept. We had said that if you want to go become an associate professor, for example, you have to initiate on a thought, perform the research, and publish it in this country, in Iran, I mean. Well, many people didn't. And then they said, hey, I'm here 7-8 years, I'm not promoted to associate professorship. I have a paper. I said, yeah, but this paper was written on the same subject as your thesis. You took your thesis, you stretched it a little bit. It's not a new idea that you went after. And then they were mad, and the Comité Refah essentially was promoting more politically oriented people rather than, I mean, by friendship they would get the people in into the closed doors. Yeah. But anyway, this is, I think when a country starts on a path of unionization, these are usual problems. I mean, you find people who start something and they take it to an extreme, and their vested interest becomes very important to them, but it is a part of the life of Iran that it's amazing that Savak was never very much against this union formation, although it was I mean, none of the chancellors of the universities were pressed by Savak to stop or do something, but it just, I don't know, Savak was never, during my time that Savak was never interested in the university, period.
Really, not at all?
Nobody came to me, nobody talked to me. Whatever they wanted to do, I think they would have done it anyway. I mean, there were cases that they captured the student, but they captured him. I mean, I even didn't know. I read it in the paper, for example. There was no a priori knowledge. There was no interaction with the university in the way that chancellor would know. But I remember before, from what was told to me by other previous chancellors, they had meetings, regular meetings at ministry with Savak agents present or this sort of thing. But at the time I was there, which was after 1975 I became chancellor, there was none of these sort of cases. In fact, I didn't know Savak existed. I could have not known Savak. I knew it existed.